Good evening, and welcome to What's Your Story? I have a very, very special guest tonight on the show. It is a distinct honor and a privilege to have with me in this room, in this hour in our nation's history, the 16th President of the United States, Abraham Lincoln. Welcome to the show, Mr. President.
Well, thank you very much. It's nice to be here.
And sir, and how are Mrs. Lincoln and the kids?
Well, Mrs. Lincoln is doing fine. I understand that she is out shopping just as we speak, and so she tells me that always puts a smile on her face. And my boy Tad is probably right now hitching up a goat to a chair in the White House and is giddy-upping around up and down the long hallways that we have in the White House.
Yes.
But thank you for asking.
You're welcome, sir. Mr. President, in August of 1619, 90 years prior to your birth, on February 12, 1809, and by the way, sir, happy birthday in 2 days, a British ship named the White Lion dropped anchor at Jamestown, Virginia. 30 Angolan slaves were on that ship. They were sold for food and supplies. This, in effect, was the first shot of the Civil War, some people have argued. The battle to rid this land of the evils of slavery had begun, a battle that shaped you as a leader, a man, and a human being. What factors were a part of your thinking over the issue of bondage and slavery, Mr. President?
Growing up, my family always attended an anti-slavery church, and so I was always surrounded by those who felt that slavery was a wrong. When I was a boy, up till the age of 21, however, I got a sense about what it must be to be a slave and to do work and not get paid, because the practice in my area in Kentucky and Indiana was that the father could rent out his son, and I could work all day, and then my father would get paid. And so I thought that was a great injustice. So whenever I spoke out against slavery, I always talked about how those who do a day's worth of work should always get paid. However, I have also said that I have always hated slavery. I cannot remember a time when I did not so think and feel so. But when I became president, I followed what was followed by all of the other presidents before me, down to George Washington, who felt that slavery could exist in the states where they presently do, but we would not let them extend into the national territories. The founders and I felt that slavery would eventually become nothing and would eventually just fall out of existence.
You know, Mr. President, as I'm sure you're well aware, there were several attempts at law to deal with slavery. Mr. Jefferson described it as a wolf that you can't let go, and if you do, it's going to eat you, and you can't stay on it. In light of that, quoting from Mr. Jefferson, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Declaration of Independence, Congress signed this document August 2, 1776. 85 years later, on April 12, 1861, the Civil War began. Mr. President, why did we have a Civil War?
We had a Civil War because there were a number of people who felt that slavery was right and ought to be extended. And there were others who felt that slavery was wrong and ought to be restricted. And that was the rub. That was the real issue that was before us principally in the North against those who were in the South. And so those in the South wanted to extend slavery into the national territories, and the Republican Party said, no, we will not do that. From the time of Washington on to me, we would not allow slavery to be extended, and so those in the South felt that they would like to leave this country instead and keep people as property. And so I wanted to make sure that if there was ever any bloodshed, that they would have to fire the first shot, and they did. And now that we are engaged in a war, as I once said, I will not leave this contest until I have played every card in my hand.
In your first inaugural, sir, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe you said, trying to offer a carrot, we are not enemies, we must not be enemies. Were you offering a branch to the South, to the people who refuse to, you know, as you well know, sir, the industry, the livelihood of the South, slavery. So in effect, what we are saying is that we're going to wipe out your livelihood.
What I said in the first inaugural also, before I said that, was I said, I will not do anything about slavery where it exists in the current states, that I felt that I had no power to do so, and it would be against the Constitution for me to do so. And so I wanted to try to assure those in the South that I was not going to do anything about slavery where it currently existed, which is why I said, we are friends, we are not enemies. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. The mystic cords of memory, stretching from every battlefield to every heart and hearthstone all over this great land, will yet swell the chorus of the Union when again touched, as surely it may be, by the better angels of our nature.
When you realize, Mr. President, that nothing you could do would prevent the South from firing the first shot, if you will, I believe 7 states or 6 states had already seceded from the Union prior to you taking office. I believe you were elected in November of 1860. You took office on March 4th, 1861, and by then states were seceding. Other states were on the cusp of seceding. Sir, give the audience an insight into your heart and soul as you realized. Did you believe that the war would be what it became, the bloody, prolonged, protracted nightmare that it is? Did you believe that, sir?
I did not believe it. I did believe that I felt that there were most people in the South who actually wanted to stay in the Union. And in my first inaugural address, I said, states cannot leave without the agreement of the other states, and therefore the Union is unbroken. And so the very first year of this conflict, I did not want to press too hard, because I felt that so many citizens in the South would come around and would want to become good citizens once again. But as the months stretched into 1862, I realized that I had to do something about slavery, because slavery was the cause of the war.
What was your cabinet? How was your cabinet on the issue of slavery and the Civil War? I'm sure you discussed it with them. Were they united in your support of your efforts, sir? Or?
I tried to put people in my cabinet who were representing different parts of the North. I had New England, I had Pennsylvania, I had Ohio, and so I wanted to have a broad representation so that they could go and talk to their own constituents to gather support for the general idea of what we were trying to do. I would also say, therefore, that I had Treasury Secretary Salmon Chase, who was the most abolitionist to abolish slavery yesterday, all the way down to I had Montgomery Bates, who was what was a moderate Democrat. And so I needed that representation. So I knew that when I took a step that I didn't have to get too much fire for doing so, that I had all of those opinions before me.
Mr. President, the rumor has it that you went to libraries and got books on war and war strategy, that when you entered the White House, you knew very little about military strategy. Your military experience was the Black Hawk War, I believe.
Yes.
But you went and learned strategy so that you could discuss intelligently with your generals. Heartbreak, heartache with generals, Mr. President?
Well, I would have to say that the biggest heartache was with General McClellan because he just did not want to press his advantage too hard. And as I told other members of the cabinet, I said, all of these generals, they want me to be the general. They come to me and they say, well, I think I will try it, but if you think I can do it, then I'll try it on. And in that way, they wanted me to make the decision, which is why General Grant was such a obvious person to lead all of the armies, because, as I said, I cannot spare the man. He fights. And that's what I needed, is someone who would go after it like a dog on a bone and grab it and just keep holding on. And that's what General Grant was.
Mr. President, it's also rumored that you offered to hold McClellan's horse, if that would get him to move. Is there any truth to that, sir?
No, that is true. Every time that he would not move, or he would move slowly, there were people behind me who wanted to get rid of him, and I still had great confidence in him. I didn't realize, however, that he was more like a piano tuner who could get a piano all tuned up, but he just couldn't play a song. He was a master at gathering an army, outfitting it, ready to fight, but then once the fighting started, he became very small. And but I kept hoping, encouraging him to do better the next time. And so I said that if he could give me victories, then I will be happy to hold his horse for him. And still that wasn't enough.
You're quoted as having said, Mr. President, "Whenever I hear anyone arguing for slavery, I feel a strong impulse to see it tried on him personally." You said that March 17th, 1865, when you were talking to Union troops. Is it true that it is true that you hated slavery, sir, but your moral view of slavery and your views on matters of race are not the same? In fact, you hold many of the, if you will, sir, racist attitudes towards blacks, Hispanics, and Indians that are deeply entrenched in the people of the South. How did you come to believe that the color of your skin made you superior to darker people, and that their color made them inferior to you? Has your thinking evolved? How and why?
Well, I would have to say that, generally speaking, when I was a young man, I wanted to be part of society. But I did not participate in many of the activities that were common for men at that time. I did not drink. I did not smoke. I didn't go to church. I didn't denigrate Indians. I didn't hold slaves. There was so much that I did not do that men commonly did, and yet I wanted to be part of society. There has never been an instance that showed that I mistreated anyone of the Negro race. Some could say that I was somewhat tender-hearted in the sense that when I was a boy, I shot a turkey, and the sight of blood appalled me so much that I never went out shooting for game ever again. I wrote to a friend of mine, Joshua Speed, and reminded him that when we were young men, took a flatboat down the Mississippi, and there was one sight that I saw of 10 to a dozen Negroes chained together, and the sight of that continued to exercise a profound sadness in my heart. And so I have always been against mistreating others. And it goes across the board, not only mistreatment of animals, like there was something called gander pulling, where you would take a goose and hang it by its feet, and then a man would ride pell-mell on his horse and ride past the goose and try to pull the head off. I did not do it to animals. I did not do it to other people, no matter the color of their skin. When I was president, there were a number of times when soldiers were court-martialed and their papers came across my desk, and I had to sign off on those court-martials. And I always looked for a way to pardon that soldier, finding something that could prevent that soldier from being court-martialed, let alone being shot. But whenever there was a charge of a soldier accused of rape, I always let it go through.
Mr. President, do you think that people with dark skins are your equal?
I feel that people of no matter skin type are my equal. As a matter of fact, when Frederick Douglass met me the second time, after he left that appointment, and I usually don't spend that much time with each guest.
Yes.
I spend over an hour with him, and when he left, he said that he felt big because of the amount of time he spent with me. Frederick Douglass also said that he knew all of the abolitionists, the great abolitionists in the North, all of these white men. He said that I was the first white man who treated him as an equal.
Well, that's pretty good testimony from a pretty good man, Mr. Douglass. We'll get to him perhaps in a little while. Mr. President, black and brown soldiers fought, as you know, and died to help you fulfill your constitutional obligation to preserve, protect, and defend this nation. Yet, unless we've got it wrong here, and that's entirely possible, sir, you supported repatriation of Africans, former slaves, back to Africa. As you noted in your Gettysburg Address, their sacrifice and blood consecrated this land. They gave their last full measure of devotion. Why should they be encouraged to leave the land that they fought and died for? Did you support repatriation? And if you did, why, Mr. President?
I was one of the ones who held on to that concept of having the Negro race leaving this country to populate the Caribbean, the South America, parts of Africa, because I had seen how entrenched white hatred, the prejudice that white people had for the blacks. I did not think that these two races could live together. So for the longest time, I held on to the notion that that they should go and live in another land. A delegation of black leaders came to see me in the White House one time, and I said to them, "You suffer from being here. We suffer from your presence. We suffer together." It is also true that once I signed the Emancipation Proclamation and allowed Negro men of suitable condition to enlist in the military, and once they showed how they could fight, my subsequent speeches and letters turned to say to the whites, if you do not want to fight for the Negro, well, some of them seem willing to fight for you. But Negroes, like other people, act upon motives. Why should they do anything for you without getting something in return, even the promise of freedom?
You mentioned the Emancipation Proclamation, Mr. President. It was after the Union victory at Antietam, one of the single bloodiest days of the war, in 1862, did you get the political right-of-way, if you will, to eventually issue that proclamation in January of 1863. Why did you issue it, Mr. President? Was it because the Union forces were thinning and you needed manpower? Why, Mr. President?
Before I came up with the idea of the Emancipation Proclamation in the summer of 1862, that spring I spent a great deal of time trying to convince the congressmen from the so-called border states to enact a gradual emancipation where the federal government would pay every slave owner a fair price for each slave. And so by the year 1900, those states would be rid of slavery, and therefore that would be the template that other states in the South could follow. The congressmen came back and they said, first of all, the federal government couldn't afford it. There were close to 4 million slaves,
yes,
which is we are the largest slave-holding country in history.
Yes.
We have twice as many slaves as the entire Roman Empire did in its
heyday. Yes.
And so, and they said, oh, and by the way, if you do that, chances are there would be a lot of white men who would leave and they would join the Confederacy, and you even may lose the state to the Confederacy.
Right.
So, and I realized, one person asked, did we think that God was on our side? And if I lost Kentucky, I would lose Missouri. And if I lose Missouri, I lost the war.
Yes.
So Kentucky was the key. So my response to that visitor was, I'm not sure if God is on my side, but I must have Kentucky. So after that, then I realized that if I could not enact gradual emancipation, then I would do something to apply some pressure to those slave owners in areas of rebellion.
Okay,
that if they didn't come around, then I would free their slaves.
Thank you, Mr. President. That's all the time we have for this part of What's Your Story. The President will be here for a second part following this. Thank you so very much for watching. I'm James Ransom Reed Jr. Everybody has a story. What's yours?
Sometimes life just happens. Don't worry. Farmington Motorsports will get you back on the road and at a fair price. From towing to tires, emissions to transmissions.
Our ASC certified techs do it all.
Farmington Motorsports is a family-run business. We're a Napa Auto Center and AAA approved. We work on all makes and models from preventative maintenance to major repairs.
And every repair is backed by our 2-year, 24,000-mile nationwide warranty.
When life happens to you, don't worry. Farmington Motorsports.